The winter of 1914 had wrapped the Western Front in a cold, unrelenting grip. From the wind-swept coasts of Flanders to the frozen forests of northern France, trenches carved into the earth stretched like scarred lines across the landscape. The initial rush of mobilization and swift battles of the war's opening months had given way to a grim stalemate. Soldiers on both sides huddled in mud-choked ditches, their breath-forming clouds in the icy air, faces blackened by coal smoke and frostbite. The roar of artillery never ceased. The ground trembled beneath marching boots and exploding shells alike. Life was measured not in hours, but in moments of survival, punctuated by the occasional whistle of distant gunfire. For the men who crouched in these trenches, Christmas was a distant memory of home. Warm kitchens, brightly lit rooms, and the smell of roasting meats. In the mud, soldiers clutched tattered photographs of wives, children, and fiancés. Cigarettes, when dry, were treasured as the closest thing to comfort. Some muttered prayers, others cursed the heavens. Each man knew, even as he wrapped himself in threadbare blankets, that the holiday season would not pause the grinding machinery of war. Yet in this darkness, hope lingered like the faintest candle in a storm. The trenches themselves were a world apart, a narrow strip of human endurance. Dugouts, barely deep enough to sit upright, offered shelter from the wind, but little from the cold. Mud thickened around boots, trapping men in endless cycles of wet and decay. Rats skittered across the boards and the walls, fearless of men, feeding off the detritus of human occupation. Shell craters filled with icy water. Each step was a perilous gamble. Soldiers scoured the wasteland for firewood or scraps of food, and the monotonous routine of patrols, sentry duty, and repairs stretched endlessly. Letters from home arrived sporadically, often damp and smudged, their words a bittersweet reminder of life elsewhere. In these conditions, even the most hardened veteran longed for respite. The imminence of Christmas brought an unfamiliar stir, a flicker of camaraderie, a whispered hope that perhaps even here, in a landscape of barbed wire and despair, the world could remember the season of peace. Across the lines, in the German trenches, similar thoughts flickered. Soldiers noticed small fir trees on parapets, lanterns casting warm light into the darkness. Voices hummed songs in the night, and the strangest of notions began to take shape. Maybe, just maybe, the enemy was not entirely the monster their superiors had painted them to be. By the evening of December the 24th, the front lines were poised on the brink of something extraordinary, a spontaneous act of humanity that would, for a few brief hours, bring the horrors of war to a halt. Snow fell lightly over the trenches, dusting helmets and barbed wire alike. The cold, ever-present and biting, seemed almost to pause, as if nature itself were holding its breath. And then, carried on the wind, came the first notes of song from the German lines, floating across no man's land like a fragile bridge of hope. The days leading up to Christmas in 1914 were a slow, grinding test of endurance. Trenches stretched endlessly in both directions, a network of narrow corridors carved into frozen earth, reinforced by sandbags and planks of rotting wood. In some sectors, the walls of the trenches leaned perilously inward, threatening to collapse under the weight of winter rain or bombardment. Mud clung to boots and uniform hems, forming a sticky, relentless layer that resisted any effort to clean it. Water pooled in craters and dugouts, turning the trenches into icy rivers that seeped into clothing and gnawed at morale. Soldiers moved carefully along duckboards, the wooden planks slick with ice and mud, each step a negotiation between balance and exhaustion. Rats, fattened on scraps and corpses alike, darted fearlessly across the boards, squeaking and gnawing at the discarded remains of meals. Men swatted at them when they dared, but often it was easier to ignore the vermin than to fight. Lice crawled in every fold of clothing, gnawing at the skin with relentless persistence, leaving soldiers itching through sleepless nights. The smell of wet earth, decay, and unwashed bodies permeated every trench, mingling with the acrid tang of cordite from distant shell fire. Daily life was a sequence of grim routines. Patrols crept into no man's land to observe the enemy or repair barbed wire, each movement calculated and deliberate. Sentries kept watch for hours on end, eyes strained against darkness and snow, ears alert to the faintest snap of twigs or whisper of voices. Soldiers dug latrines in the frozen ground, scavenged for food from abandoned shells, and constructed makeshift shelters out of planks, tins, and anything else that might stave off the cold. Meals were sparse and monotonous. Tins of bully beef, stale bread, and lukewarm tea, often cold before it reached the men's lips. Cigarettes, when they were available, became treasures shared or traded in hushed conversations. Psychological hardships weighed as heavily as the physical ones. Letters from home were scarce, and each delay carried the risk of news that was both uplifting and agonizing. Every man carried a constant, gnawing fear, a sniper's bullet, a shell fragment, the sudden death of a friend beside him. Anxiety threaded through conversations, in jokes laced with dark humor, in whispered prayers, in the silent moments before dawn. Men clung to any semblance of normalcy, singing, sketching, telling stories of home, but the shadow of war never lifted. Yet in pockets of the front, moments of unexpected humanity occasionally punctuated the monotony. Soldiers would engage in cautious conversations with the enemy across the line, speaking to identify each other, trading small gestures of truce, or simply shouting out friendly greetings. In some sectors, temporary live and let live arrangements arose. Small, unspoken agreements to avoid firing across certain stretches of no man's land. These informal truces were fragile and fleeting, yet they hinted at the possibility that shared suffering could, however briefly, transcend hostility. As the days shortened and the chill deepened, soldiers began to whisper about Christmas. The very idea seemed almost incongruous against the backdrop of barbed wire and shell craters, but hope has a stubborn way of persisting. Men carved makeshift ornaments from scraps of wood or metal, hung lanterns in corners of the trench, and sang quietly to themselves. In some units, a man played a small harmonica or whistle, filling the trench with soft melodies that reminded others of home. The air, so often heavy with the scent of mud and smoke, carried for brief moments a hint of warmth and memory, of kitchens, of firesides, of families long gone. Even in the enemy trenches, the same current stirred. German soldiers, weary of battle and frost, decorated small fir trees on the parapets, draped candles in windows of their dugouts, and hummed carols into the cold night. The light glinted faintly across no man's land, and the singing drifted on the wind, carried across the frozen fields to reach British ears. Some men laughed nervously, others shivered with wonder. Could the enemy really be human? Could there, in this place of endless misery, be room for a gesture of peace? By Christmas Eve, the tension along the front had subtly shifted. Soldiers on both sides had grown used to each other's presence, the sounds of shovels, the scrape of boots on wood. the occasional shout. Yet there was something different in the air that evening. Perhaps it was the snow, sparkling under the dim moonlight, softening the hard edges of the landscape. Perhaps it was the collective yearning for connection, for recognition that these men, just across the wire, were not monsters, but human beings with the same fears and desires. And so, when the first carol drifted from the German trenches, tentative and uneven, it was heard not with suspicion or gunfire, but with cautious curiosity. The sound traveled across no man's land, touching hearts worn raw by months of war, and planted a seed that would soon bloom into an extraordinary act of fraternization. For the men in the trenches, the Christmas promised, however briefly, a glimpse of the world beyond the mud, the frost, and the fear, a world of light, song, and shared humanity. The night of December 24th descended like a quiet shroud over the Western Front. Snowflakes drifted lazily into the trenches, settling on helmets and wooden duckboards, muffling the familiar clamor of war. The air was sharp, each breath a thin, white plume that hung momentarily before fading. Soldiers huddled in their dugouts, knees drawn to chests, blankets frayed and thin. Fires, when they burned, sputtered weakly, casting dancing shadows across walls darkened by mud and soot. The routine of vigilance persisted. Sentries scanned no man's land with squinting eyes, ears straining for the slightest hint of movement. Patrols crept along the trenches, boots making muffled thuds on wet planks, eyes flicking to the enemy line across the frozen wasteland. But amid the usual alertness, an unusual stillness had settled. Something imperceptible but unmistakable had shifted. Perhaps it was the knowledge that it was Christmas Eve, or perhaps it was the collective exhaustion of 4 months of relentless combat. From across the line, a faint flicker of light caught the eye of a British sentry. Lanterns glimmered atop German parapets, small fir trees decorated with candles perched like fragile ornaments in the snow. Whispers passed along the trench. "They're decorating for Christmas." Some men laughed nervously, others shivered, unsure whether to greet the sight with suspicion or wonder. A corporal poked his head over the parapet and squinted across the gap. For the first time, he could see the enemy not as a faceless target, but as human beings preparing for the same festival he had once celebrated at home. Then came the sound. Voices, tentative and unpracticed, rising into the cold night air. Carols, unfamiliar but recognizable, drifted across no man's land. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night, echoed softly, carried on the wind. Soldiers paused in their chores, rifles lowering slightly. The singing was hesitant at first, faltering like children testing a new song. But it held, it persisted. A British private whispered to his companion, "They're singing to us." The words sounded absurd, almost impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Another man, clutching a tattered photograph of his wife, felt a lump rise in his throat. In the trenches, the frozen men began to hum along quietly, offering a hesitant reply. "God rest ye merry, gentlemen," floated from the British line, wavering against the wind. Across the snow-strewn field, the Germans listened, and a small smile curved the mouth of a young German infantryman. Curiosity overcame caution. Shouts began to carry, tentative greetings in broken English. "Merry Christmas." "Good evening, friends," the Germans responded with rough but comprehensible words. "Guten Abend, frohe Weihnachten." Laughter broke through the tension, tentative and brittle, but it grew stronger as the minutes passed. Men stepped onto the parapets, craning over to see their opposite numbers, rifles slung loosely or abandoned for a moment. Some officers, at first alarmed, hesitated, unsure whether to order fire or restrain themselves. The scene unfolded in a fragile balance. The men wanted peace, but discipline demanded vigilance. Yet as more soldiers leaned forward, gesturing with open hands, smiling despite the cold, the grip of routine loosened. Eyes met across the icy expanse of no man's land, and recognition dawned. These were not monsters, not abstract enemies. These were men like them, homesick and tired, yearning for warmth and human connection. Small gestures began to cross the void. A tin of chocolate appeared on the German side, a packet of cigarettes on the British. Hands waved, first timidly, then more boldly. One soldier, emboldened by the moment, stepped into the snow, unarmed, and offered a handshake. The German opposite mirrored him. The first contact was awkward, almost comical, but genuine. Soon others followed, clustering tentatively in groups, exchanging small gifts and murmuring greetings. Voices rose in song again, louder this time, stronger with the confidence of shared purpose. Silent night rang out from both lines, harmonizing across the distance. Soldiers paused, arms draped over one another's shoulders, sharing smiles despite the frostbite and mud that clung to their clothes. The trenches, once walls of separation and death, now framed a fragile communion. Men dared to joke, to trade stories of home, to tease one another gently about uniforms and ranks. The night deepened, and yet no one moved to break the peace. In some sectors, men lingered in the snow, leaning on one another, marveling at the quiet miracle of human connection. Across Europe, this exchange was as improbable as it was fleeting. Two armies, long locked in mortal combat, meeting in the middle of a frozen battlefield to share laughter, song, and the simplest of gifts. In the dugouts, soldiers paused in disbelief. Some shook their heads, uncertain whether the warmth of the moment could survive the dawn. Others simply smiled, feeling the hard edge of war soften for the first time. Even the rats and mud seemed to recede, giving way to the magic of the night. Letters would later describe the scene as surreal, almost dreamlike, a fleeting vision of a world that could have been, if not for the war. By midnight, the air was thick with song and chatter. Soldiers shared scraps of food, bits of tobacco, and the rare luxury of conversation unburdened by orders or fear. They stood, knee-deep in snow, exchanging jokes, learning names, marveling at similarities rather than differences. For a few hours, the Western Front ceased to be a place of killing. It became instead a vast, improvised parlor where humanity reclaimed its dominion, if only briefly. As the last notes of the carols faded into the winter night, the soldiers leaned back, feeling the cold more sharply now, but warmed by a shared experience that would endure in memory far longer than the frost that bit at their fingers. The truce had begun, quietly and without permission, as the war paused to recognize the simplest truth, that even in the darkest trenches, there could be light. When dawn broke on December 25, 1914, the Western Front was transformed. The snow-covered fields of no man's land, usually a scene of desolation and danger, glimmered in the pale morning light. The trenches, etched with mud and frozen footprints, seemed less like walls of division and more like the borders of a strange, suspended world. For once, the usual signals of war, the rattling of rifles, the staccato crack of machine guns, the thud of distant shells, were replaced by cautious footsteps and the murmur of conversation. At first, only a few men ventured forward. A British private, shivering in his threadbare uniform, clutched a tin of jam as he stepped onto the frozen earth between the lines. Across the way, a young German soldier, scarf wrapped tight around his neck, emerged from his trench carrying a bar of chocolate. They froze as their eyes met, hesitant and wary, yet aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Slowly, carefully, they lifted their hands in greeting. The first handshake was brief, awkward, but genuine. It rippled across the lines like the first tentative notes of a symphony. Encouraged, others followed. Men climbed out of their trenches, rifles slung loosely over shoulders, eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Some carried small gifts, tins of food, cigarettes, even homemade cakes and candies wrapped in scraps of paper. Others brought letters to share, mementos from home, or simple gestures. A wave, a nod, a smile. Across the field, strangers became companions, if only for a fleeting morning. The air filled with laughter and chatter, punctuated by the occasional shout to warn a cautious comrade or call for more gifts to be shared. British and German soldiers exchanged nicknames and jokes, mimicking accents and laughing at the absurdity of meeting across lines that had only hours before been battlefields. One German officer, noticing a British sergeant holding a small tree he had dragged from his dugout, raised his eyebrows and offered a grin. The sergeant responded by bowing in mock deference, and the laughter that followed spread along both lines. Religion found its place in this fragile peace. Chaplains from both sides emerged, carrying books and prayer mats, joining in quiet services among the graves of the fallen. Soldiers knelt in the snow, their heads bowed, murmuring prayers for family, for comrades, and for the men across the lines who had shared this improbable morning. The contrast between the serene act of devotion and the previous months of relentless combat was striking. Men wept quietly, not in fear or despair, but in recognition of the fragile beauty of the moment. Gifts changed hands in an impromptu ceremony of goodwill. Chocolate, tea, cigarettes, and biscuits traveled between soldiers who had only moments before aimed to kill each other. Buttons, photographs, and letters became tokens of an unspoken connection. One young soldier, emboldened by the calm, pressed a small bundle of dried fruit into the hands of his former enemy. In return, he received a cigarette and a tiny figurine carved from wood. These simple exchanges, though modest, carried the weight of shared humanity that transcended the mud and wire of the trenches. Music, too, played a central role. Soldiers sang carols in unison, voices blending across the snowy expanse. Silent night rose and fell in harmonies, and even those who had never sung before joined in, carried along by the warmth of the moment. Some Germans played small flutes or harmonicas. Some British soldiers clapped in rhythm, tapping their boots against frozen ground. The sound echoed faintly, a fragile symphony that seemed almost impossibly incongruous amidst the scarred landscape. For a brief time, the war seemed suspended. Small groups formed in the snow, laughing, talking, and sharing food. Children's toys, carried from home by soldiers, were examined and passed along. Cigarette smoke mingled with the frosty air, and snow was tossed playfully between hands, once hardened by months of routine duty. The men's faces, streaked with mud and soot, were animated with joy, their eyes bright beneath the grime. Even those who had been hardened by months of fighting could not resist the novelty of this communal peace. Yet the truce was uneven. Not every sector saw the same openness. Some officers remained vigilant, keeping their men in the trenches, wary of potential deception. In certain stretches, patrols watched cautiously, ensuring no hidden threat disturbed the fragile calm. In others, soldiers daringly ventured further into no man's land, exploring together the territory that had only days before been a killing ground. The variation across the front created a patchwork of interactions, each unique yet unified by the shared desire for peace, however temporary. Amid the human gestures, small rituals of remembrance unfolded. Soldiers tended to the dead, placing crosses and garlands on graves, regardless of nationality. They shared prayers for fallen comrades and reflected on the absurdity of the war that had brought them into this moment of peace. In one sector, a British officer and a German counterpart stood side by side, surveying the field that had claimed so many lives, and quietly agreed to honor the memory of the fallen together. By midday, no man's land had transformed into a scene almost surreal. Men played informal games, tossed snowballs, and examined the small treasures each had brought. They shared stories of life before the war, of families, of holidays past. Differences of language and culture were bridged by laughter and shared curiosity. Even amidst the ever-present cold, warmth radiated from this fleeting fellowship. As the afternoon waned, the soldiers lingered, reluctant to return to the trenches. They knew the truce was fragile, an interlude suspended in time, but they embraced it nonetheless. Hands remained clasped in friendship, gifts continued to circulate, and songs drifted into the slowly lengthening shadows. The day had become more than a pause in fighting. It had become a shared human experience, a memory that would endure far longer than the war itself. The Christmas Truce had begun in earnest, not through orders or planning, but through the courage and curiosity of men who dared to recognize one another as humans. For a few hours, across the frozen expanse of no man's land, the war receded, replaced by laughter, song, and the remarkable realization that enemies could, if only for a day, be friends. As the morning of Christmas Day unfolded, the atmosphere in no man's land shifted from tentative goodwill to something altogether lighter and more exuberant. Soldiers, previously cautious and awkward, began to relax, their bodies warming against the cold, not just from exertion, but from the simple joy of shared humanity. Where once there had been suspicion, there was now laughter. Where there had been silence, there was song. The rigid barriers imposed by months of conflict had softened, revealing the enduring spirit of men who longed for life beyond the trenches. The first football appeared almost magically, a worn leather ball. Its stitches fraying and its surface cracked from months of use, was propped in the snow by a German corporal who had seen British soldiers watching curiously from across the line. A few tentative kicks were exchanged, the ball rolling and bouncing erratically across the frozen field. The soldiers paused, then slowly gathered around, forming uneven teams, a dozen men on each side, laughing as they tried to coordinate their movements over the uneven, cratered terrain. The game began cautiously. Feet slipped on icy patches, boots sank into snow-laden craters, and the ball often veered unpredictably into mud or barbed wire. Yet the laughter grew louder with each misstep. Soldiers shouted instructions and encouragement in broken English and German, sometimes switching languages mid-sentence, sharing jokes at each other's expense. A British private tripped over a mound of frozen earth, landing on his hands and knees, only to be lifted to his feet by a German soldier with a weird grin. Their laughter mingled with the ringing sound of boots kicking the ball, a strange symphony of play amid the war-torn landscape. Music intertwined seamlessly with sport. Soldiers began to hum and sing carols, improvising harmonies as their breath rose in white plumes above their heads. One German soldier produced a small harmonica, its notes drifting over the field like a gentle counterpoint to the laughter and shouts. British men tapped rhythmically on their helmets, creating percussive accompaniment. The sound carried across no man's land, blending the two languages and cultures into a single, unifying melody. Men who had never spoken before found themselves joining in, their voices rising together in a shared, jubilant chorus. The exchange of gifts continued, now with an added playfulness. Soldiers tossed packages and tins across the snow, careful to avoid striking anyone, creating a game of barter that complemented the football match. Chocolates, biscuits, and small trinkets traveled back and forth, traded for cigarettes or buttons, with laughter accompanying each transaction. One young German infantryman proudly presented a wooden carving of a soldier to a British private, who, in return, offered a tin of tea and a broad grin. Others shared postcards, tiny toys and photographs, small fragments of life from a world far removed from the mud, wire, and frozen earth. Conversations deepened as the day progressed. Soldiers spoke of home, of families, of past Christmases by firesides long forgotten. A Scottish private told a German soldier about his mother's homemade plum pudding, while the German replied with a description of the snow-covered forests of Bavaria where he had grown up. Differences of language and custom mattered little. The human connections bridged the gap with ease. Even the youngest soldiers, mere teenagers in uniform, marveled at the surreal sight of enemies laughing and sharing the simplest joys of life together. Amid this festive atmosphere, acts of camaraderie continued to emerge. Soldiers tended to each other's minor injuries, brushed the snow from one another's coats, and helped those whose boots had become mired in frozen mud. A group gathered around a small fire, carefully lit in the open air, sharing tea from improvised containers. The smell of the warming brew mingled with the scent of snow and earth, a comforting reminder of home. Stories of loved ones, of childhood holidays, and of impossible dreams filled the air, softening the edges of a battlefield scarred by violence. Even the dead were honored in the midst of celebration. Soldiers from both sides paused to place simple markers on graves, arranging wreaths of pine and holly found in the nearby countryside. Chaplains from both armies performed quiet services, their voices rising in solemn tones that harmonized with the carols and laughter around them. The rituals were spontaneous, heartfelt, and shared, a stark contrast to the brutality that had claimed so many lives just days before. The football game persisted, growing in both size and intensity. More men joined, some simply to watch, others to participate. The snow-strewn field became a canvas of motion, with players slipping, sliding, and occasionally colliding with laughter rather than anger. The rules were improvised, the teams uneven, but no one minded. The act of playing, the sheer physicality of running, kicking, and shouting, became a celebration of life, a rebellion against the grim, regimented existence of trench warfare. As the afternoon sun lowered, casting long shadows across no man's land, the sounds of laughter, song, and football persisted. Soldiers paused only occasionally to exchange further gifts, to swap stories, or to marvel at the oddity of the day. Even the most hardened veterans of the front were touched, recalling fleeting memories of Christmases long past and imagining, if only for a moment, a future beyond the trenches. In these hours, distinctions of nationality, rank, and duty dissolved. Enemies became companions. Trenches became stages for human connection rather than fortifications of conflict. The surreal scene, the snow, the laughter, the music, the football, the gift exchanges, formed a tableau that none would forget, a fleeting glimpse of what the world might have been without the shadow of war. As twilight approached, the men lingered, reluctant to retreat to the rigid confines of their trenches. They had tasted a brief, extraordinary freedom from the war, and the bonds formed, though fragile, were real. For this single day, no man's land was transformed into a field of friendship, music, and play, an unlikely sanctuary of humanity in the midst of violence and fear. The Christmas truce, in this way, was not simply a cessation of fire. It was a reclamation of life, a celebration of spirit, and a testament to the enduring power of human connection, even in the most desperate of circumstances. For the soldiers on both sides, it would remain a memory as vivid and precious as any they carried from home, a symbol of hope and fellowship that no shell or order could ever entirely erase. The Christmas Truce of 1914 was not merely an event. It was an experience that imprinted itself deeply on the minds and hearts of the soldiers who witnessed it. Each man carried his own story, some of wonder, some of disbelief, and some tinged with a cautious unease. In the trenches, the act of fraternization stirred emotions long suppressed by months of mud, blood, and fear. For many, the truce was a revelation. A British private, recently arrived at the front, described the sensation as walking into a dream. One moment, he was crouched in a frost-laden trench, alert to every sound of enemy fire. The next, he was standing in no man's land, shaking hands with a German soldier whose uniform was equally caked in mud, exchanging tins of chocolate and cigarettes as if they were childhood friends reunited. The absurdity of the moment struck him deeply. It was impossible, yet undeniably real. A young German infantryman, barely 19, experienced a similar mixture of astonishment and joy. He had grown up in a small Bavarian village, far from the industrialized horrors of modern warfare. The sight of British soldiers laughing in the snow, sharing stories of home, and kicking a worn football across the frozen fields made him feel as though the war itself had paused to honor something sacred. For these men, the truce was a reprieve from the relentless machinery of violence, a fleeting chance to breathe freely, to remember themselves as humans before soldiers. Amid the wonder, there was nervousness. Some soldiers feared that any step too far might provoke gunfire or sabotage. When British and German men stepped into the open, they did so cautiously, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. Eyes flicked constantly to the lines, measuring reactions, reading intentions. It was a delicate balance, the exhilaration of connection tempered by the ever-present memory of bullets and shells. For every handshake or shared joke, there was a brief, unspoken calculation. Can we trust this stranger? The officers' perspectives added another layer to the day. Some were secretly delighted, recognizing that morale could benefit from a brief interlude of goodwill. Others were dismayed or even furious, worried that discipline had been undermined and that future obedience might falter. A British lieutenant recalled the uneasy exchange between camaraderie and duty. He smiled as men traded chocolates and cigarettes with the enemy. Yet he was aware that by nightfall, his men would return to their posts and the business of killing would resume. The duality of delight and dread weighed heavily. Even the most hardened veterans felt the human impact. A Scots guardsman, who had seen friends fall within days of his arrival at the front, marveled at the laughter echoing across no man's land. We had spent months watching each other through periscopes, trying to kill one another, he later reflected. And now, here we were, talking and joking as if the war had never existed. It was both comforting and utterly surreal. The experience underscored the strange complexity of human emotion in wartime. Grief and joy, fear and exhilaration, suspicion and trust all existed simultaneously. Some men experienced moments of profound empathy. Soldiers tended to minor injuries among the enemy, sharing blankets or helping a comrade pull free from frozen mud. A British private helped a German soldier who had twisted his ankle in the snow, and together they limped back to the center of the open field, laughing despite the pain. Acts like this, small yet intimate, created bonds that no orders could sever. The war might dictate strategy, but it could not dictate compassion. Letters and diaries from the time reveal a spectrum of reactions. One young German soldier wrote home, "I shook hands with Englishmen today. We laughed, we sang, and we shared food. I cannot explain it, Father. How can we be enemies one day and friends the next?" A British rifleman described the surreal sight of a German officer crouching to examine the stitches on his boot, then offering a tiny carved figurine in return. Another recounted the shock of seeing enemy soldiers smiling, joking, and singing, emotions so incongruous with the months of fear and death that preceded them. There was also a sense of regret that the moment was so fragile. Soldiers recognized that the truce could not last indefinitely, that soon the guns would roar and the orders to fire would return. Many lingered in the snow, reluctant to return to the trenches, hesitant to leave the warmth of human connection behind. A British soldier wrote, "I wanted to remember every detail, the laughter, the songs, the football. I knew it would vanish with the night, but I wished it could stay forever." In some sectors, the truce sparked quiet tension. A few men, unwilling to trust the enemy, kept their rifles close, ready to respond if necessary. Officers occasionally intervened to enforce caution, wary that any misstep could ignite violence. But even these measured individuals could not entirely resist the pull of the day. Many participated indirectly, observing the exchanges with a mixture of relief and awe, aware that even the smallest gestures of fraternity carried profound significance. Language barriers, too, were bridged with remarkable ease. Soldiers gestured, mimed, and used scraps of shared words to communicate. Names were exchanged, stories of family recounted, and laughter shared across the icy expanse. Men discovered that despite nationality, upbringing, or rank, their desires were universal: to survive, to connect, and to reclaim a fragment of life that the war had stolen. By the end of the day, soldiers carried a mixture of emotions: joy at the extraordinary human connection, sadness at its impermanence, relief at the pause from fighting, and apprehension about the inevitable return to battle. These reactions, personal, vivid, and varied, revealed the true impact of the Christmas Truce. It was not merely a pause in hostilities, it was a human experiment in empathy, camaraderie, and shared understanding, a fleeting but powerful reminder that even in war, the human spirit could prevail. The soldiers' memories of that day would endure long after the trenches emptied. For decades, veterans recalled the laughter, the songs, the football games, and the shared gifts as some of the most extraordinary experiences of their lives. They remembered how, for a few hours, enemies became companions, and the frozen, bloodied expanse of no man's land was transformed into a place of connection, warmth, and fleeting peace. While soldiers across the Western Front embraced the spirit of Christmas with laughter, song, and tentative friendship, the higher echelons of the armies were far less inclined to celebrate. For the officers and high command on both sides, the truce represented a breach of discipline, a dangerous precedent, and, in their eyes, a threat to the very machinery of war that relied on obedience and enmity. In the British trenches, company officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some, witnessing their men laughing and trading gifts with German soldiers, felt a pang of admiration for the humanity displayed, yet they were acutely aware of their responsibilities. Commanders worried that such fraternization could undermine authority, that the men might refuse orders when the inevitable return to battle came. A lieutenant, observing his soldiers play football across no man's land, murmured to a colleague, "I suppose it's human, but we cannot allow it to continue. We have men to command, and this is dangerous folly." Reports of the truce quickly reached brigade and divisional levels. Senior officers on both sides scrambled to understand the scope of the situation. From London and Berlin, telegrams carried stern instructions. Fraternization was forbidden, men must return to their posts, and any repetition in future engagements would be met with punishment. Yet, despite the edicts, the truce persisted in many sectors, largely because the front line was too vast and chaotic for immediate enforcement. Soldiers in the midst of snow-laden fields were far beyond the reach of strict supervision, and the human desire for connection proved more compelling than distant commands. German commanders faced similar tensions. Some officers, alarmed at the sight of men stepping into no man's land, feared the loss of discipline and potential vulnerability to ambush. Others, however, understood the morale boost such an event provided. A battalion commander later recalled walking along the trenches, witnessing the exchange of gifts, the laughter, and the informal games. "It was extraordinary," he reflected. "Yet I feared the men would lose respect for the chain of command." Discipline is fragile. Sentiment, dangerously contagious. Within the high command, the truce sparked strategic concern. Military leaders recognized that the front relied on the perception of the enemy as a threat, a force to be resisted without hesitation. Acts of goodwill blurred that perception, creating uncertainty that could, in theory, compromise operational effectiveness. Orders were dispatched to enforce strict firing schedules, to forbid any recurrence of spontaneous truces, and to remind officers of the ultimate purpose of war. The human instinct for compassion, commanders feared, could not be allowed to undermine the machinery of conflict. Despite the admonitions, enforcement was inconsistent. Some officers reluctantly tolerated the fraternization, understanding that forcing men back into trenches at gunpoint during the brief respite could provoke mutiny or morale collapse. Others sent small squads to patrol the lines, gently encouraging soldiers to return to their posts without resorting to violence. In many sectors, the snow, the laughter, and the spirit of Christmas acted as natural shields against rigid orders. Soldiers, caught between the exhilaration of connection and the weight of duty, navigated the delicate balance with remarkable discretion. The truce was also interpreted differently depending on perspective. Lower-level officers sometimes regarded it as a minor lapse, almost a quirk of winter, while senior commanders treated it as a symbolic threat. War correspondents and journalists, when allowed glimpses of the fraternization, struggled to reconcile the image of smiling soldiers with the reality of the ongoing conflict. Dispatches described the scene as extraordinary, surreal, and unprecedented, an act of human rebellion against the abstract and impersonal machinery of war. In several accounts, officers acknowledged the odd camaraderie with grudging amusement. A German captain described seeing British soldiers standing in the snow, singing carols and tossing a football. He admitted, privately, that the spectacle was bizarrely uplifting, yet he reinforced orders that no such behavior could be repeated. Similarly, British officers noted the danger of men exchanging gifts, fearing that familiarity might foster reluctance in future engagements. Across both armies, a common thread persisted: admiration for the soldiers' humanity, coupled with an unwavering insistence on discipline and obedience. By the evening of December 25th, the first signs of compliance emerged. Some soldiers reluctantly returned to the trenches, aware that daylight was fading and that vigilance would soon be required. Officers walked along the lines, quietly enforcing the boundaries while trying not to dampen the spirits of men who had experienced one of the rarest and most remarkable moments of their lives. The truce, they knew, could not extend indefinitely, and soon the routine of war would resume. Yet even as orders were read and rifles repositioned, the memory of the day lingered. Soldiers carried mental snapshots of handshakes, shared gifts, laughter, and football across the snow-covered field. Officers may have enforced discipline, but they could not erase the collective experience that had transformed the trenches, if only temporarily. It was a lesson in the enduring power of human connection, a momentary but indelible pause in a world otherwise consumed by violence. The High Command would attempt to prevent a repeat in future years, issuing strict instructions and occasionally punishing minor fraternization. But the events of Christmas 1914 remained etched in the memory of the men on both sides. In letters, diaries, and later recollections, soldiers described the contrast between command and experience. The officers emphasized obedience, while the men emphasized friendship. The truce had revealed a profound truth. No amount of strategy or discipline could entirely suppress the human desire for kindness, laughter, and recognition of shared humanity. As the sun set over the frozen expanse of no man's land, commanders returned to their offices and tents, dispatching orders and reviewing reports. Yet, in the trenches below, soldiers huddled together, trading the final gifts of the day, whispering last songs of carols, and savoring the fleeting warmth of fellowship. The High Command could enforce rules, but it could not extinguish the memory of one extraordinary day when the world seemed, however briefly, to be united in the simplest act of peace. The days following the Christmas Truce of 1914 brought a swift return to the familiar rhythm of war. The laughter, songs, and football of no man's land receded like the retreat of a tide, leaving trenches cold, dark, and filled once more with the echoes of artillery. Men who had spent hours exchanging gifts and sharing stories returned to their posts, their spirits tinged with both warmth and sorrow. The truce had been fleeting, a delicate bubble of humanity suspended in the icy expanse of a war that had no mercy for pause. For the soldiers, the transition was bittersweet. Many lingered at the parapets, staring across the snow-strewn field, reluctant to leave the fleeting sanctuary of no man's land. The Germans and British who had laughed, sung, and played together now returned to their respective lines, each step heavier than the last. The act of leaving felt unnatural, as if retreating into the trenches was abandoning not only the truce, but also a fragile hope that the world could be different. A British private later wrote, "We left them standing there, and I felt a weight in my chest, heavier than any shell or rifle could bring. For a moment, we had shared something pure, and now it was gone." Officers worked to restore routine. Orders were repeated. Trenches were to be manned, patrols conducted, and discipline maintained. The normal cadence of the front, the endless shoveling of mud, the watchful patrols, the sporadic exchanges of gunfire, resumed with a quiet inevitability. Some men, however, found it nearly impossible to reintegrate into the rhythm of hostility. Memories of handshakes, shared songs, and football matches haunted them, a stark contrast to the grim reality of trench life. A German soldier noted in his diary, "It is as though we had been shown a world beyond this war and then forced to close our eyes to it again." Yet the impact of the truce lingered, subtle but profound. Soldiers carried with them physical mementos, chocolates, cigarettes, buttons, and carved trinkets exchanged with the enemy. These items became talismans of the shared humanity experienced on that extraordinary day. More enduring, however, were the emotional imprints. Men who had once seen the enemy as an abstract, faceless adversary now recognized a shared humanity, a truth that even months of conflict could not erase. Friendships formed in those hours, however temporary, became a source of reflection and solace in the month that followed. The truce also revealed a new, complicated understanding of morality and duty. Soldiers recognized the tension between obedience and conscience, between the orders to kill and the impulses to connect. Some questioned the necessity of continued hostilities, at least for brief moments of peace. Others understood that survival and duty required the eventual return to fighting, yet the truce lingered as a reminder that war was, ultimately, conducted by human beings capable of empathy. Letters sent home after Christmas often reflected this tension. One British soldier wrote, "We shook hands with the enemy, and it felt right, but tomorrow we shall be told to kill, and I wonder how I will reconcile these two truths." Not all soldiers returned to the trenches with the same clarity of conscience. Some were wary, having glimpsed the possibility of friendship across enemy lines. Others were determined to forget, to bury the memory lest it interfere with duty. Still, the stories spread along the front lines. Soldiers who had witnessed the truce recounted it to those in adjacent sectors, embellishing details or sharing moments that had struck them most. The smiles, the laughter, the songs, the impromptu football games. Even men who had not participated felt the effect, a faint, humanizing influence on the otherwise dehumanizing landscape of war. Commanders sought to ensure that future interactions were curtailed. Orders were reinforced to prohibit fraternization, to maintain vigilance, and to punish any attempt at unsanctioned truce. Yet, despite the regulations, the events of Christmas 1914 persisted in memory. Soldiers remembered that, for a few hours, war could pause, and humanity could flourish even amid suffering and destruction. The truce had demonstrated an unspoken truth, that beneath the uniforms, beyond the orders, and across the trenches, men on both sides shared the same fears, hopes, and longing for connection. Life returned to the familiar cycle of mud, patrols, and sporadic gunfire. Trenches once again became narrow corridors of vigilance and fatigue. The front lines, scarred by months of combat, seemed unchanged to the casual observer. Yet among the soldiers, a quiet awareness persisted. They carried with them the knowledge that the enemy was, first and foremost, human. The memory of Christmas Day, with its laughter, gifts, and football, acted as a subtle counterpoint to the relentless horror of war, a mental refuge to which men could retreat in moments of despair. In letters, memoirs, and oral histories, the soldiers reflected on the emotional and psychological dimensions of the truce. Some emphasized relief from the monotony and terror of trench life. Others highlighted the fleeting nature of peace as a poignant reminder of the absurdity of war. One veteran recalled decades later, "We had been taught to hate, to aim, to kill. And yet, on that Christmas, we learned something deeper, that the heart remembers what the mind is forced to forget." Ultimately, the aftermath of the truce was a mixture of resignation and hope. The war would continue, as unrelenting as before, but the memory of Christmas 1914 endured as a testament to the possibility of humanity in the darkest of circumstances. Soldiers returned to their duties, carrying with them the small comforts and profound lessons of the day, the value of connection, the fleeting power of joy, and the enduring truth that even amid devastation, human kindness could survive. The Christmas Truce of 1914 did not remain confined to the snow-laden fields of the Western Front. It endured in memory, letters, diaries, and later historical narratives as one of the most remarkable acts of human connection amid the unprecedented carnage of World War I. Though fleeting, its impact resonated far beyond the day itself, inspiring reflection, commemoration, and storytelling that continues to captivate generations. For the soldiers who had experienced it, the truce became a touchstone of hope. Memories of shared laughter, football matches, carols, and the simple act of shaking hands with the enemy offered a quiet refuge in letters and memoirs. One British veteran recalled years later how the sight of a German soldier smiling across the snow reminded him that humanity could persist even in the darkest circumstances. The memory was vivid, indelible, and a source of comfort during subsequent battles that seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with mud, blood, and despair. In personal accounts, the truce was often described with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. Men marveled that, in a war defined by brutality, there could exist moments of joy and shared humanity. Diaries recorded the exchange of gifts, the impromptu games of football, and the singing that echoed across the snow. These details, trivial in the logistical sense, became profound symbols of resilience and compassion. Soldiers would recall decades later the scent of pine, the crunch of snow beneath boots, and the warmth of comradeship that transcended national divisions. Historians, when examining the truce, emphasized both its uniqueness and its poignancy. Unlike orchestrated ceasefires, the Christmas truce was spontaneous, arising organically from the shared desire for a moment of peace. It revealed the capacity for empathy and cooperation, even in the midst of systematic violence. The truce demonstrated that human connection could interrupt the machinery of war, if only briefly, providing insight into the psychology of soldiers and the limits of obedience under extraordinary circumstances. The event also found expression in culture and media. Newspapers at the time reported on the unusual fraternization, highlighting the improbable human moments amid the chaos of war. Artists, playwrights, and later filmmakers captured the spirit of the truce, portraying it as a symbol of peace and the enduring strength of human empathy. The story of soldiers shaking hands across barbed wire, exchanging chocolate and cigarettes, or kicking a ball through no man's land became emblematic of hope, a narrative counterpoint to the otherwise grim history of the First World War. Memorials and commemorations followed in subsequent decades. Veterans organizations held ceremonies recalling the extraordinary day, and historians documented the accounts of soldiers who had participated. In towns and villages across Europe, plaques and exhibitions highlighted the story of the truce, emphasizing its lessons for future generations. School children learned of the day when enemies became friends, and the truce was invoked as a symbol of reconciliation, emphasizing that even in conflict, there exists a possibility for humanity. The symbolism of the truce endured in collective memory. It became more than a historical event. It was a metaphor for hope amid despair, proof that compassion could survive even in the most extreme circumstances. Scholars often noted its relevance beyond the First World War, suggesting that the truce illustrates the enduring potential for human empathy in any era of conflict. Its lessons resonated across cultures, reinforcing the idea that individuals can, through small acts of kindness, challenge the dehumanizing forces of war. Even within military circles, the truce became a case study in the limits of discipline and the resilience of human nature. Officers and strategists recognized that while command structures could enforce rules, they could not entirely suppress the moral impulses of men on the ground. The truce demonstrated that soldiers' humanity could emerge spontaneously, unbidden by orders, and that these moments could coexist, paradoxically, with duty and survival. For the men who had lived through the Christmas of 1914, the truce remained an enduring memory, a reference point for their understanding of war, friendship, and the human capacity for empathy. They carried stories of shared songs, laughter, and football across no man's land into their later lives, recounting them to families, neighbors, and fellow veterans. These stories preserved the emotional truth of the truce, ensuring that it became an integral part of the narrative of World War I, not just as a pause in hostilities, but as a testament to the persistence of humanity, even in the darkest times. In literature and popular culture, the truce is often invoked as a symbol of fleeting peace, a reminder that moments of connection are possible even amidst chaos. The image of soldiers standing together in the snow, smiling and singing, has inspired novels, films, plays, and artwork, reinforcing its place in collective memory. It serves as a perennial reminder that war is not solely defined by violence and suffering, but also by the rare and extraordinary capacity of people to transcend enmity, if only for a moment. The legacy of the Christmas truce extends beyond memory into the present day. Annual commemorations, reenactments, and exhibitions celebrate the extraordinary courage required to step beyond hostility, highlighting the enduring relevance of empathy, kindness, and the pursuit of peace. In classrooms, museums, and public discourse, the truce is invoked as a model of reconciliation and moral courage, reminding new generations that even in the midst of conflict, the human spirit can assert itself in remarkable and enduring ways. Ultimately, the Christmas Truce of 1914 endures not only as a historical anomaly, but as a universal symbol, a reminder that amid the machinery of war, humanity can persist. Its lessons of empathy, shared joy, and fleeting reconciliation resonate across time, affirming the enduring possibility of peace, even when the world seems dominated by conflict. For those who lived it, and for all who learn of it, the truce represents a moment when war paused to allow friendship, laughter, and light to prevail, if only for a day. And that was the story of the Christmas Truce of 1914, a fleeting moment when humanity overcame the horrors of war, even if just for a day. Soldiers on both sides set aside rifles and fear to share laughter, song, and friendship in the snow-covered fields of no man's land. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion, empathy, and hope can shine through. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a journey into history's extraordinary moments. And tell us in the comments, if you could witness one moment of peace in history, what would it be? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about the lessons it can teach us today.